days of winter, we are hungry for light, for enough to help us see, enough to help us keep going. Epiphany is the season stretching between Christmas and Lent of light revealed. Jesus, the light of the world, has come to us, a light shining with love that shines through the cracks of what is broken, illuminates what is true, and guides us toward what is possible. But this Epiphany season is not only about light revealed to us, it's about light revealed through us. Following the light, letting the light in, and becoming that light. Because it isn't only dark outside. We live in a time when it seems we are asked to carry the suffering of the whole world, every crisis, every headline, every heartbreak, even though our hearts were never made for that. We're left asking, can this light we bear make any difference? The stories of Jesus tell us yes. Yes, it absolutely can. Contrary to our ever-expanding and consuming culture, it turns out we were made for something smaller, more human, to know our neighbors, to tend what is close, to respond to what is right in front of us. So in these dark days, as we turn to the stories and teachings of Jesus, we're invited to turn toward the light, to glimpse the way forward, to be led by Jesus, to respond on a scale our hearts can carry as it ripples out to change our world. Let's be honest, we don't have to look far to see that the darkness can be really dark, and yet the light grows.
This is the Holy Gospel of third chapter of Matthew. Then Jesus came from Galilee to John at the Jordan River to be baptized by him. John would have prevented him, saying, "I need to be baptized by you, and do you come to me?" But Jesus answered him, "Let it be so now, for it is proper for us in this way to fulfill all righteousness." Then John consented, and when Jesus had been baptized, and just as he came up from the water, suddenly the heavens were opened to him, and he saw the Spirit of God descend like a dove and alighting on him. And a voice from heaven said, "This is my Son, the beloved, with whom I am well pleased." Here ends the reading. So, how are we all doing? We got to ask that question this morning. It's been a rough week, and more for some than others, right? We're not all impacted equally by these things. We got to always acknowledge that. But I just want to invite you just for a second to just sit in your chair, close your eyes for a minute, and just take a deep breath when you're ready to do that. I'm just going to give you a couple 20 seconds to do that. So I want you to know that as Jesus begins his ministry here, folk are maybe even facing worse stuff than we're experiencing as a nation and as a world. The Roman Empire was brutal, and their client kings like Herod, remember a few weeks ago the story of all the slaughter of the innocent children in and around Bethlehem, right? There was no accountability for that. That was just a part of the nature of how you exercise power in the first century. Rome believed in exercising power over other people. They were very good at it, and one of the ways that they exercised power over people was by dividing groups against each other. They called that divide and rule, because they ruled over a vast empire full of all kinds of different ethnicities and traditions, and they would find ways with local agents that would breed distrust among all those folk. And it was easy then to justify that they brought the peace of Rome because all these people in these different cultures and traditions, they don't know how to get along, and without us to keep order, why, everything will fall apart. So there was indeed a deep kind of gloom over everybody, but not just over everybody, but in everybody, not just in everybody, but between everybody. And there were people in the Jewish tradition who believed that a Messiah would come, an anointed one, who'd be a king, a prophet, and a priest, who would set things right. And there were some really powerful teachings about that Messiah. That they would kick out the Romans. They would kick out the Romans using swords and spears and knives. So much so that the mountains of Zion would be painted red with you know what. And so here in this passage, we see Jesus being anointed, that Messiah, in the River Jordan, but in a very particular way. Now, all of us today are trying to figure out in our culture, how do we deal with all the stuff that's happening out there in the world? And as Christians, many of us have been given two options for most of our lives. The two options are that there's a split between the sacred and the secular, the private and the personal, and there's God stuff, and then there's the world stuff, and you got to get away from the world, you know. And so we kind of come together on Sunday morning and sort of ride the theological teacups inside of a Mad Max world. But there's nothing we can really do about it out there. And that split does more than just keep us from acting. It actually bifurcates our lives, our souls, our hearts, our emotions, even our bodies. It cuts us in half. It distracts us. It pulls us apart. But there's another option we've been given, maybe even worse, which is that the way Christians need to deal with the world, deal with politics and policy and social unrest and all these kinds of things, is to impose Christianity on other people, in particular a certain version of Christianity, through a kind of manipulation or even domination. We see that today, especially with the movement of Christian nationalism in the country that wants to create a permanent pecking order between people of different traditions and races, and to impose that through governmental power. And I don't know about you, but when someone tries to tell me how I'm supposed to think and feel, what do I tend to do? What do you think? If you know me a little bit, what do you think I tend to do? Do I say, oh yeah, you're right? You know, most people don't, because there is a fundamental thing about human beings that we all have agency. We're all made in the image of God, and we have the capacity and the responsibility to discern like how we're going to behave in the world. And when someone else tells us how we're supposed to be, when someone else tries to dominate us into behaving a certain way or seeing things a certain way, we do not like that. Which means then that the dominators resort to even more domination. So it is by no chance a mistake or a happenstance, I should say, that we have seen with the emergence of that kind of Christianity in the public realm that more and more people have left the church. Because nobody wants to be dominated. I mean, I got loved on this summer by a friend, by a family member, who was trying to dominate me through kindness. Ugh. Okay. So, is there an option? Is there an option, a third option? I believe this passage has it. So, Jesus is being anointed the Messiah, which is not a private kind of role. You know, a king or a ruler, a prophet, and a priest, those are all public roles within Israel. And so they're all about the public, about how life in the community is ordered. The ruler sort of saying, hey, you know, these are the laws, these are the rules that we all got to abide by, and if you break the rules, there'll be accountability for that. The prophet's job is to hold the system accountable to what God really believes, to what God's about in the Abrahamic tradition. And the priest is there to help people sense a kind of meaningfulness of life, about why we get up in the morning and what it is at night that gives us a sense of accomplishment and meaning. So those are all public things. And so when God says to Jesus, when the heavens are opened and the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting on him, and a voice from heaven says, "This is my Son, the beloved, with you I am well pleased." There is those little sentence carries the answer to our third way of operating in the world. Because this verse, "This is my Son, the beloved," comes from Psalm 2, which is a coronation psalm. So Jesus is being announced as the Messiah who will reorder the way human society works around two key values. One is that there's one creator, and thus there is one humanity. But that one humanity comes in lots of different cultures and traditions and forms and shapes and skills and abilities. But there is still one creator. And that means that when we see other people, when we act toward other people, we see them as children of God, as siblings, as partners, as people with inherent dignity. You may have heard that before in the founding documents of this country. What did we say? We said it imperfectly. But that all people are created equal and are endowed with certain inalienable rights, that is, things that cannot be taken away from them. That was a secular expression, although partly secular expression, of this deep value. The second deep value is to love your neighbor as you love yourself. That's what the king was supposed to do. That's what the prophet was supposed to preach about. That's what the priest was supposed to help us find meaning in. And why is that idea of loving your neighbor as you love yourself important? Because it is essentially the social contract that is the reason why you and I are freaking alive. Because our ancestors learned how to cooperate with each other and not just fight each other. They learned how to take the best gifts from every community and bring them together. And because of that ability to form that social contract of loving your neighbor as you love yourself, which is shared by almost every tradition around the world, including atheism, we have been able to learn to cooperate. And so the king was accountable to that. But if you're under an occupying army, if someone else has come and is taking away your farmland, if someone else is coming and taking away your businesses, if someone is taxing you to the point of starvation, what are your options? During the time of Jesus, there were quite a few. You could go out into the wilderness and try to escape, like the Essenes did. You could be a collaborator, like the Sadducees were. You could say, well, if we just get ourselves religiously straight, God will come and deal with it. Some people tried that. Other people, called zealots, tried armed conflict and insurgency and violence. But in this passage, says N.T. Wright and many other biblical theologians, the Christian tradition put together two traditions from the biblical record that had never been together before. It took the ideas of the Messiah who was going to come and paint the hills red, but then bring a change that was good, with another tradition. The other tradition was the suffering servant in Isaiah chapter 40s, in the 42. And in that tradition, the people of Israel were in Babylon, they were enslaved, and they found a new way, inspired by love of God and love of neighbor, to push back on their enslavement. Instead of trying to respond with violence, how did they respond? They respond with the kind of soul force that Gandhi talked about. They responded with the kind of public display, public engagement that we saw on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, when 600 people went over the bridge to push back on the lack of voting rights for black people in the South and across the country, and they were met with what? Terrible violence. And that terrible violence that day toward those people, including John Lewis, whose skull was fractured, broke open the lie that this was just maintaining good order. That is the kind of vision of the suffering servant from Isaiah 42. A kind of a vision that many people, at least in Babylon, were living out. And so what we see here is not only is Jesus the prophet, the priest, and the king kind of person, the prophet, the priest, and the ruler kind of person, but he had a certain kind of methodology. And that methodology was to remember always to respect the dignity of the person, even the person that is oppressing you. Because when you see them as human beings, you won't resort to the same kind of method. And they may be able to turn, because that deeply lives out the value of all people made in the image of God and loving your neighbor as you love yourself, which Jesus later even took to an extreme. And you all know what it is. Love your who? Love your enemy. So there is a methodology that Jesus is bringing in his public leadership. And so he does critique Herod. He does critique Rome. You have to look sometimes in the text, like in Matthew 25, he takes the Roman Empire apart by saying that essentially it is a government of thieves who reap where they do not sow and gather where they do not scatter seed. So he does all that public ministry, but he does so living out the values of one creator and one humanity, and loving your neighbor as you love yourself, and even loving your enemy. So what does that mean for this split? It is not possible for us as Christians to say we love our neighbor and not be engaged in the political systems and the policies that impact whether or not your neighbor can eat. It is just not possible. It just isn't. That does not mean that you impose your Christian view, your eschatology, your vision of the future. It doesn't mean you impose your theology on other people. It means that we take our values, our deep values, and we engage with people in the most deeply respectful way we can manage at that moment. That we do all of our prayer work and all of our thought work and our hikes in the forest and our going outside and standing on the grass with our bare feet to remember that we're just human beings, to prepare for a moment when we can engage with somebody who's super heated up. So what it means is that we are going to engage as citizens in a conversation informed by our tradition, but not seeking to impose our tradition. So that means we got to learn to do what we all know is code switching. So when I talk to an atheist, do I say to them, well, you need to love God? Do you think I do that? There's one creator, atheist. You better believe in that one creator, or you're not part of the human family. Do you see what I just did there? If you believe in that one creator, then you're part of the human family. That's what we can so easily do as humans. So when I talk to an atheist or agnostic, that is not what I say. I say to them, well, part of the Abrahamic tradition teaches me to love God more than my in-group and my tradition. But what I think that might mean, where we could have a conversation, I'll say to them, is that we should love all human beings and all of life more than our in-group and our tradition. You see what I did? So we're going to have to learn to have that conversation, not necessarily on our home turf, on our own theology, and impose our language on other folk, but to bring our values into that place. But as the video that you all put together so perfectly says, how many of you today have a lot of power to change the way that ICE is, the rules of engagement that ICE engages with in communities? How many of you have the power to stop that right now? How many of you would like that power right now? Okay, yeah, that's right. So what I want to tell you about is that Jesus isn't asking you to have that power. Jesus is asking you to love your neighbor in your neighborhood. That may include conversing with your mayor and your county council and your state assembly and our national representatives. But you're not being asked to fix everything. You're being asked to love your neighbor here, trusting that in the next neighborhood, what are Christians there going to do? What are people there going to do? They're going to start loving their neighbors. And so over the last year and a half, I've been blessed to be a part of a series of calls on Zoom with leaders from across the country, with representatives of like 10,000 pro-democracy, bridge building, like getting people together and respecting people organizations across the country. Some are in universities, some are nonprofits, there's just all kinds of them. Some people work on election reform, and some people work on constitutional reform, and some people are just really good at getting folks together and having a human conversation. And what I want to tell you is that there's over 10,000 of these organizations in the nation. There's over 10,000. And every time I enter the call, I'm like depressed, because I want to change the rules of engagement that ICE is using too. But every time I'm on these calls, I realize I am only being asked to do my part. I'm being asked to do what I can do within my neighborhood, trusting that it would be part of a larger movement of renewal for our society, a larger renewal of our democracy in society, and that you and I together can bring our deepest values into that space without seeking to dominate or impose, but entering into a kind of conversation. Because that's what we do with other people that are made in the image of God, because we know that they are carrying a part of the image of God that maybe we don't carry. Maybe they have insights. Maybe people who are conservative have an insight that maybe people who are progressive may not understand. Like sometimes the progressive movement thinks that if we just change this, and this, everything will be fixed without thinking about unintended consequences or the pace of change. Sometimes that's true. There are lots of critiques of all of our perspectives out there, and what I would say is that we need each other. And so when Jesus is called in this moment to be the Messiah, he's being called into public leadership and to work on the larger society around him, but to do so in a way that is deeply respectful of the dignity of the other human beings that he's engaging. And to recognize the deep call to a kind of social contract of loving your neighbor as we love ourselves. And I believe that for me, that answers that split. Because I'm not trying to impose my view on everyone, but I'm trying to bring the deep values that Jesus, that the Holy Spirit, that our tradition has formed me into that public space. At the end of the Gospel of Matthew, does Jesus finish his work as Messiah? Does he reorder everything? Yes and no, right? Is the Roman Empire gone when he died? When he goes up? Okay, is everything the way it should be? So what did he do is he said, well, that he's beginning not just, he's not just the Messiah, he's beginning a messianic movement of people that will engage with the issues and challenges of the world, will focus on loving the neighbors in their neighborhood, and will do so by respecting those two core values, that there is one creator and one humanity, that other people are made in the image of God even when we disagree with them, and that together we can learn to love one another as we love ourselves. That, I believe, is the calling of disciples. And so we may have this long split in Western Christianity that says we can't engage with our faith in the public realm, or that we have to impose. Jesus is already in the first century answering that split and saying that we do engage, but we do so out of deep reverence, not only for our Creator, but for the people God created. Amen.